She swore she hated him. Her best friend's brother, arrogant, annoying, always in her space. But every time he walked away, her chest tightened, because the truth she was hiding could destroy everything. Before this story ends, one secret will break a family, one choice will change 3 lives, and one love will be exposed when it's almost too late. If you believe the strongest love stories are the ones we're most afraid to admit, subscribe now, because this story will stay with you long after the last word. She had known him since she was 16, and from the very beginning, he had been a problem, not because he was cruel or loud or reckless like people expected, but because he noticed everything she tried so hard to hide, and that made him dangerous in ways she never admitted out loud. Ethan was her best friend Lily's older brother, the kind of man who filled doorways without trying, who leaned against walls like he owned them, who smiled in a slow, knowing way that felt like he was always one step ahead of the room, and every time he walked into Lily's house while she was there, her shoulders tightened automatically, her mouth forming irritation before her heart could betray her. She told herself he annoyed her because he teased too much, because he questioned her opinions, because he remembered things she said months ago and threw them back at her when she least expected it, but the truth she buried under sarcasm and eye rolls, was that she had been watching him for years, memorizing the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, the way his voice softened when Lily was upset, the way his eyes darkened when he thought no one was looking. She had promised herself long ago that she would never let those feelings surface, not after what happened, not after the night everything changed and she realized wanting him was the one thing she could never afford. Lily trusted her with everything, her secrets, her heartbreaks, her fears, and betraying that trust felt worse than denying her own heart, so she became skilled at pretending, at snapping back when he joked, at acting bored when he sat too close, at convincing everyone, including herself, that Ethan was just an inconvenience in her life. But denial didn't stop the way her pulse jumped when he said her name, or the way she noticed when his smile faded whenever she dated someone new, or the quiet tension that crackled between them like a storm waiting for permission to break. And when Lily announced that she was moving overseas for a year, leaving the two of them alone in a house full of memories and unresolved feelings, she didn't realize she was setting the stage for secrets to surface, boundaries to blur, and a love that had been suffocating in silence to finally demand to be seen, no matter the cost. Lily's departure happened faster than anyone expected, like a door slamming shut before either of them realized they'd been standing too close to the frame, and suddenly the house that had always felt crowded with laughter and noise became unbearably quiet, every sound echoing with meaning. The morning Lily left, she hugged her best friend so tightly it almost hurt, promising daily calls and endless messages, promising that nothing would change just because an ocean now sat between them, and as she waved from the car window, neither of them noticed the way Ethan lingered on the porch, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes fixed not on his sister but on the woman standing beside him, the one who was pretending her chest wasn't cracking open. The first night after Lily was gone was the worst, because silence has a way of stripping people bare, and without Lily's voice filling the space, every unfinished thought, every unsaid word, every look that had been held too long suddenly demanded attention. She stayed over because Lily had begged her to, had insisted the house would feel safer if someone was there with Ethan, as if she had unknowingly handed both of them a match and left them alone with gasoline. They tried to act normal at first, moving around each other carefully, exchanging polite conversation that hovered just above the surface of something deeper, but tension doesn't disappear just because people refuse to acknowledge it. It grows sharper, heavier, until even the smallest moment feels loaded. When Ethan cooked dinner that night, sleeves rolled up, forearms flexing as he moved, she sat at the kitchen counter pretending to scroll through her phone while every nerve in her body screamed awareness, and when he casually asked why she'd broken up with her last boyfriend, the question landed harder than he intended, dredging up memories she'd spent years locking away. She snapped back instinctively, telling him it was none of his business, but he didn't rise to it like he usually did. Instead, he looked at her quietly, like he was seeing through the walls she'd built, and said, "You don't have to lie to me," in a voice so calm it scared her more than anger ever could. That was the moment she realized things were shifting, that the balance they'd carefully maintained was slipping, because Ethan wasn't just annoying her anymore, he was challenging her, pulling at threads she'd tied into knots to survive. Over the next few days, the house became a pressure cooker of almosts. Almost touching hands in the hallway, almost honest conversations late at night, almost admissions that trembled on the edge of their tongues before fear shoved them back down. She caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable but intense, and she hated herself for the warmth that spread through her every time their eyes met. The breaking point came when Lily called one evening, cheerful and excited, talking about her new life, her new friends, completely unaware of the storm brewing thousands of miles away, and as her best friend laughed through the phone, she felt guilt claw at her throat because every word felt like a reminder of the line she was standing on, the one she could never cross. After the call ended, she stood in the living room shaking, overwhelmed by emotions she no longer had the strength to contain, and when Ethan asked what was wrong, something inside her finally cracked. She told him to stop looking at her like that, to stop asking questions, to stop making things complicated, but instead of backing away, he stepped closer, voice low and controlled, confessing that he'd been trying to ignore his feelings for years, that watching her pretend she didn't care was torture, that he was tired of silence doing all the talking. The confession hit her like a wave, knocking the breath from her lungs, because hearing him say it out loud made denial impossible, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them, charged with everything they'd never allowed themselves to feel. She should have walked away, should have reminded him of Lily, of loyalty, of the consequences waiting on the other side of honesty, but instead she stood frozen, tears burning her eyes, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. And when Ethan finally stepped back, pain flickering across his face as he apologized for putting her in that position, she realized the twist she'd never prepared for was this. Losing him, even without ever having him, hurt more than any secret she'd been carrying, and the choice she'd been avoiding was no longer hers to escape. The days after Ethan's confession felt unreal, like she was moving through a life that no longer belonged to her. Because once something is spoken aloud it can never be unheard, and every glance, every silence, every shared space now carried the weight of truth. She avoided him at first, staying out late, locking herself in Lily's old room, convincing herself that distance could undo damage, but feelings don't shrink when ignored, they grow teeth. Ethan respected her silence more than she expected, giving her space even though it clearly cost him, and that restraint hurt almost as much as his words had, because it reminded her of the man he was, loyal to a fault, even when it broke him. The twist she'd buried for years began to surface in quiet moments, memories she'd never allowed herself to fully confront. The night she'd realized her feelings weren't harmless, the moment she'd overheard Lily once laughing about how she'd never date someone like her brother, unknowingly sealing a promise she never knew her best friend had made for her. That was when she'd chosen denial, chosen distance, chosen to carry the weight alone rather than risk shattering the only family she'd ever truly felt part of. But secrets have expiration dates, and hers came sooner than expected when Lily surprised them with a video call, her face glowing with excitement as she announced she was coming home early. The news hit like a lightning strike, panic flooding her veins as Ethan's expression hardened with something like dread, because suddenly time was no longer on their side and unfinished truths were ticking like bombs. That night, sleep abandoned her completely, and in the dark she finally allowed herself to admit what she'd refused for so long, that loving Ethan hadn't been a choice, but choosing silence had been, and it had carved wounds into all of them. She found him on the back porch just before dawn, sitting alone, staring at a sky that was slowly turning gray, and when she spoke his name, there was no irritation left in her voice, only exhaustion and honesty. She told him everything then, the fear, the guilt, the moment she'd realized she loved him years ago and decided she would rather suffer quietly than betray Lily, and as the truth spilled out, tears followed, because carrying love alone is heavier than losing it. Ethan listened without interrupting, pain and understanding battling in his eyes, and when she finished, he admitted something that stunned her, that Lily already knew. Not everything, but enough, that Lily had seen it years ago, had confronted him, had warned him that if anything ever happened, it had to be real, not secret, not stolen, not something that would rot with guilt. Lily hadn't wanted lies, she'd wanted honesty, and realizing that shattered the foundation of fear she'd built her life on. When Lily finally came home, the confrontation she'd dreaded didn't happen the way she imagined. There were tears, yes, and anger, and moments of silence so thick they felt unbearable, but there was also relief, because truth, once exposed, frees everyone it touches. Lily admitted that watching them dance around each other for years had hurt more than the idea of them together ever could, and that the betrayal would have been silence, not love. In the end, the choice she'd avoided was no longer a cliff edge but a bridge, and stepping onto it felt terrifying and necessary all at once. Months later, when life settled into something new and honest, she realized the irony that still made her smile, that the man she once claimed annoyed her had been the one person patient enough to wait for her truth, and the love she'd hidden to protect everyone had only needed courage to finally belong. And sometimes, the strongest stories aren't about falling in love, but about finding the bravery to stop pretending you already haven't.